I suspect that most people feel that fear is a survival mechanism and it helps push us away from danger. But what if fear actually pulls us closer to the very things that we're trying to avoid? What if it hijacks our focus, distorts our reality, and shapes our lives without us even realizing it? Welcome to the Light Journal Podcast. I'm Jamie Perez, and today I want to talk about something that we all deal with, fear, but not in a way that we usually think about it. Most of us believe that fear pushes us away from danger, that it warns us, protects us, and keeps us safe. And in certain circumstances, I'm sure that's exactly what it does. Fear can act like an alarm system, but when fear becomes a way of life, when it's always in the driver's seat, instead of pushing us away, fear actually starts to pull us in the path of the thing that we're most afraid of. Fear is magnetic, and when we don't recognize that, we end up being drawn closer and closer to the very thing we want to avoid. I like to take my dog for walks down the road, and there are several houses that have dogs that tend to be out when I go walking. But at one of those homes, there's a couple of Labradors that are very aggressive in their behavior, and they will come rushing right up to us, stopped only by an electric fence. And they'll stand there barking and barking like they want to eat us alive. Now, my dog is already afraid of other dogs, so you'd think that she'd want to avoid them, that she would try and cross to the other side of the road, for example. Or at least she'd stay close to me or rush to get past them and keep her distance, but that's not what happens. Even if I'm on the opposite side of the road, she locks her eyes on those dogs and she starts pulling me toward them. Her fear isn't keeping her safe. It's actually taking her right into the path of danger, not only because of traffic on the road, but because she's walking right towards those dogs she's afraid of. And I'm like, why is she doing that? Why is she behaving that way? Why is her fear drawing her into the thing that she's most afraid of? And in case my dog story doesn't work for you, think about driving. Most of us have probably experienced this. We're driving along and suddenly something startles us. Maybe flashing lights, a wreck, or a car swerving. We get a rush of adrenaline, right? And the next thing you know, we're rubbernecking. We're locking our eyes onto that car or to the accident or to the lights. And then before we realize it, we're drifting lanes. Or we realize we're like inches from slamming into the car ahead of us, or maybe we're veering into the ditch. Why? Because where we're focusing is where we go. That focus pulls us in. And that's how fear works. When we direct our gaze, when we focus our gaze on something, whether it's a dog, an accident, or a nightmare that's been playing over in our minds, that's where our energy and our movement goes. That's what makes fear so powerful and so dangerous. It hijacks our focus. It distracts us from where we want to go and lures us toward where we don't. This obviously isn't just about dogs or driving. This is about how we live. For example, if you're afraid of getting into an accident, what do? You drive tense and you're overly cautious. You might white knuckle the wheel. You might hesitate, overcorrect, or slam on the brakes too quickly. And ironically enough, those fear-based reactions increase your chances of getting into the very kind of accident that you're afraid of. So if you're afraid of gaining weight, you might obsess over food, exercise, and calories. Your whole mental orbit circles around the very thing that you dread. And that obsession creates unhealthy cycles like restricting your food, binging, guilt, and those things only deepen the struggle and increase the likelihood of actually gaining weight. Or let's look at the topic of judgment. Have you ever noticed how the things that we criticize the loudest are often the things that we most fear in ourselves? Maybe you're terrified about being lazy, so what do? You're always pointing out all those lazy people over there. Or maybe you're terrified of being seen as immoral. So what do? You point out all the other flaws or all the other acts of immorality that other people do. Fear in these cases is masquerading as high moral ground, but it's actually a mirror of your own insecurities. Fear keeps our gaze locked on what we don't want. And because energy follows attention, our behaviors slowly reshape until they match whatever we're focusing on. We become or we experience the very things we want to avoid. And this brings me to something a little more personal. When I was in Christianity, fear wasn't just an occasional struggle. It was a foundation for the system that I was in. Fear was what the preachers and the church used to try and control the flock. It might have been the fear of sin, or of failing God, or being deceived, or being influenced by demons or demonic forces. And that fear, it made it impossible for me to connect with anybody on the other side of the veil. It made spiritual growth almost impossible. For example, if a loved one tried to connect with me from the other side, maybe using a dream, a song, a familiar smell, I would have been terrified. I had been taught that anything outside of church-sanctioned spirituality were demons in disguise. I remember the first time I saw a spirit guide. I was 9 years old, and my sister woke me up because she was outside sneaking some TV time to watch Alice Cooper. And I saw a spirit, but it was just standing there and it was watching her. I didn't know about spirit guides. That was something I learned after I left the faith. So when I saw the spirit, I thought I was seeing a demon, and that fear just paralyzed me. I also remember as a child, I used to see skeletal heads floating around me when I was laying in bed at night. And skeletons had to be demons, right? What else could they be? So instead of asking myself what they are, what they symbolized, or what else they might be or represent, instead of applying curiosity to the experience, I cowered under the covers, convinced I was being tormented by demons. You know, that spirit guide I saw was not a demon. It was there protecting my sister, and I was honored to be given a glimpse of it. And those skeletal heads, those weren't demons either. They were the result of years of conditioning, of being brainwashed to fear anything that I didn't understand. Fear kept me tied and bound, afraid to explore, to learn, or to evolve. And it does the same thing now to millions of people in the world today. Fear doesn't just control what you do, it changes what you see. You see what you believe to be true, even if your beliefs and your interpretations are a lie. In my case, I saw demons when what I was really encountering were spiritual guides, messages, and symbology. But fear blinded me, and it distorted my perception. It kept me chained to a false narrative that cut me off from a deeper spirituality. And as I'm speaking about this, it actually reminds me of the story of Plato's cave. In case you're not familiar with the allegory, Plato describes a group of prisoners who've been chained inside of a cave their entire life. They're facing a wall, and behind them is a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, people are walking back and forth carrying objects. The prisoners can't see the people or the objects, they can only see the shadows being cast on the wall. Over time, those shadows become their reality. They believe the shadows are the things themselves. And if someone were to break free and step outside the cave into the sunlight, they would see the shadows were just illusions, mere reflections of something much larger and much more real. Fear keeps us staring at the shadows on the wall, convinced they're reality. My sister's spirit guide, I was convinced it was a demon. The skeletal images I saw as I was falling asleep at night became evidences of demonic tormentors. Anything I didn't understand became proof of spiritual danger. I wasn't seeing the truth. I was seeing shadows distorted by fear. And once you believe the shadows are real, your entire life is shaped by that belief, by those fears. You'll never turn around. You'll never look for the light. You'll stay locked in place, reacting to illusions instead of experiencing reality. Fear traps us in the cave, blinding us to the possibility that our fears are not real. It convinces us that the safest thing is to keep our eyes on the wall, even though the truth lies behind us, waiting to be discovered. And it's not just religion that does this. Fear of rejection makes us misread people's expressions. A neutral look suddenly feels like disapproval. Fear of failure makes us interpret silence as judgment. Fear of abandonment makes us see distance where none actually exists. Fear becomes the lens that colors everything we see. It's like wearing glasses that tint the whole world. So no matter what happens, it always looks like danger. And once again, we move toward it. We recreate the very thing we fear because fear is magnetic. So what do we do about it? How do we stop fear from pulling us into what we don't want? First, we have to recognize fear for what it is. It's just a distortion. It's not a guide, and it's certainly not going to protect us. Fear screams at us to look at the barking dogs, to stare at the wreck at the side of the road, or to obsess over the worst possible scenario. But the truth is, fear is terrible at pointing toward reality. Second, we can choose where to place our gaze. If energy follows attention, then by shifting our attention, it will also shift the energy. So instead of locking eyes on what we don't fear, we need to retrain our focus towards what we do want in our lives, like peace, health, compassion, freedom. Third, we have to build new associations. Where religion trained me to see demons, I've had to retrain myself to see spirit and to see messages of love and guidance and synchronicities. Where fear once told me, "You're in danger," I've had to learn to ask, what's being revealed here? And finally, we need compassion for ourselves. Most of us have been taught these fears. They are inherited fears. And it takes a while to unlearn something that you've been taught since you were a child. But every time we redirect our gaze or choose to be curious instead of afraid, every time we lean into trusting instead of obsessing, we weaken fear's hold over us. Fear is magnetic. It pulls our gaze and our feet towards what we don't want. It convinces us we're safer staring at danger than looking where we really want to go. It distorts reality, keeps us helpless and hopeless and blocks us from spiritual growth. But fear only wins if we give it our attention and focus. So today I want to leave you with a question. Where are you looking? Are you staring at the barking dogs? Are you staring at the skeleton heads or the things you dread the most? Or are you looking toward peace, love, and freedom? What you focus on, you move toward. Fear is magnetic, but so is truth. So is love, so is freedom. Choose where you look, and you will choose a new reality for yourself. You've been listening to the Light Journal podcast. I'm Jamie Perez. If this podcast has resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell to be notified when new episodes are dropped. Blessings on your journey, everyone.